The night I told my parents I was marrying a man who welded steel for a living and shared his house with his younger brother, my mother set down her wine glass so carefully it made no sound at all, and said, "Ivy, you do understand what you're actually signing up for here, don't you? This isn't just a husband. This is a permanent arrangement you cannot give back." The arrangement was Bram. He was 22 years old, sitting across the dinner table in a button-down he had clearly ironed himself, and he had spent the last 10 minutes trying to get through a sentence about the drive over without his stutter catching. He got there eventually. My father nodded. My mother smiled at the wall above his head. She didn't say the word burden that night. She waited until she had me alone in the kitchen, rinsing dessert plates to find her phrasing. "He'll need someone to manage him," she said, handing me a glass, "for the rest of his life, and that someone becomes you." She said it with genuine concern in her voice. That was the thing about my mother. She always sounded like she was worried about you, when she was really worried about what you represented. My family ran on appearances the way some engines run on a specific grade of fuel. Nothing else would do. My mother kept the social ledger. She knew who had married well, who had bought in the right zip code, who attended the right church, and who had quietly declined. My older sister had delivered on every metric. Her husband was an orthopedic surgeon. They had a house in Scottsdale with a pool that photographed beautifully. At every family gathering, that pool came up at least twice. My father was quieter. He loved me the way a man loves something he doesn't know how to protect. From a distance, through small gestures, with a silence that was easier to maintain than a confrontation. When my mother spoke, he would refold his napkin into a careful square and study it. I had learned to read that fold. It meant he agreed, or that he was too tired to say otherwise, which in our house amounted to the same thing. I worked in the records department of a small law firm, matching documents, chasing signatures, building the paper trail that holds a case together. I had been doing it since I was 24, and I was good at it. Quietly, without fanfare, the way you get good at something nobody thinks to applaud. I met Sawyer at a lumber yard. I was there on behalf of a client's property dispute. He was there for cedar planks and a belt sander and a level he'd just broken on a job site. He was tall, a little sun-beaten, wearing work clothes that had been washed so many times they'd lost the memory of their original color. He helped me carry a floor sample to my car without being asked, then apologized for being presumptuous. I told him he wasn't. He wrote his number on the back of a hardware receipt. I called it 3 days later. On our second real conversation, he told me about Bram. He didn't lead with it or bury it. He said, "I want you to know what my life actually looks like before this goes further." Bram was his younger brother by 9 years. Their parents had died within 2 years of each other, their father in a car accident, their mother to a stroke. And Sawyer had taken legal guardianship of Bram when Bram was 19. Bram had a processing disorder and a stutter that had made school brutal, and made strangers impatient, and made the world move faster than he could comfortably track. He was also, Sawyer said, the person who had once taken apart a broken engine at 16 and reassembled it correctly from memory just because he wanted to understand how it worked. "He's not a project," Sawyer said. "He's my brother, but you should know what you're walking into." That honesty, that exact phrasing, was the thing. I had grown up around people who performed generosity and concealed their terms. Here was someone laying his out plainly before I had agreed to anything at all. I brought them both to meet my family in March. It went the way I had half expected and half hoped it wouldn't. Bram wore the ironed button-down. He practiced what he was going to say in the car. He got stuck twice on the word neighborhood and pushed through it both times, himself. My sister's husband shook his hand once and turned back to my father to talk about golf. My mother asked Bram two questions: what did he do during the day, and had he looked into community programs? And the second one to clear she was not actually asking. After Bram and Sawyer went to the car to get something, my mother pulled me into the kitchen. "That's not a marriage," she said, her voice wrapped in concern the way a blade can be wrapped in cloth. "That's a caretaking arrangement with occasional romance. You'll spend your life managing him and resenting the life you gave up." I told her I didn't see it that way. "You will," she said. Then she gave me the choice she always offered when she had already decided the answer: come to your senses or don't come back. I did not come to my senses. We married that October in Hester's backyard. Hester was our neighbor. 71, a retired librarian, a woman who had decided without asking anyone's permission to simply love the people who lived on her street. She lent us her patio string lights and her grandmother's tablecloth, and stood in the front row crying at the right moments. Sawyer's business partner, Carver, showed up an hour early and fixed the tent stakes that kept pulling loose from the soft ground. Bram stood up front in a gray suit he had picked himself, and when it was his turn to hand over the ring, his hand was completely still. Before I left for the ceremony, Sawyer said, "If your family ever calls, we answer. I won't be the reason you lost them." He meant it. For 7 years, he kept that door unlocked even when I wanted to bolt it shut. I mailed my parents an announcement. It came back in 3 weeks with my name crossed out in my mother's handwriting. Return to sender. No note. That was the whole message. I slid it into an accordion folder on the top shelf of our closet. I kept it because keeping things is what I do. It is, functionally, my job. The phone calls to relatives started a few months later. My aunt called, her voice low and pained, asking how I could do this to my father when he was this sick. A cousin sent a message about praying for my dad and hoping I was at peace with my choices. My mother had already buried me in a story. In it, I had abandoned a critically ill man to run off with a welder and his dependent brother. I want to be honest about what that story did to me. I believed the parts I couldn't disprove. My father was sick. That much I accepted, because why would a mother lie about her own husband's health? It was too monstrous to manufacture, and so the guilt did what it was designed to do. It settled into my ribs and stayed there like a second skeleton. Bram felt it too. A few months after the wedding, he looked up from the notebook he was working in. He kept detailed notebooks, drawings and measurements and observations that looked chaotic, but were organized in a way that made complete sense to him, and said, without any preamble, "Did I make them hate you?" I did not give him a speech. He didn't need one. "They left because of who they are," I said. "You're the reason I stayed." Then I did the thing that mattered more than anything I said. The next morning, I added his name as our household's emergency contact at the city services office. I wrote his name in the shared calendar under every important date. I had a copy of our apartment key made for him on a plain silver ring. He held it the way you hold something that took longer to receive than it should have. Because it had. The first years were the kind of lean that doesn't make good stories, grinding and specific and invisible in hindsight. Sawyer and Carver were building custom structural steel fabrication work, seismic retrofitting for older commercial and residential buildings. The work was essential and unglamorous and paid on a schedule that required constant management. I kept our finances in a spreadsheet I updated every Sunday and moved money between accounts like rearranging sandbags before a flood. Sawyer left before 6 and came back late, smelling like metal and heat. Bram handled more of the household than people assumed he could. He cooked well, tracked appointments, remembered where everything lived in our kitchen, and kept the calendar that kept us functional. We 3 were carrying one house from 3 different corners, and none of us could have managed it from only one. There was a night that first winter I still think about. Sawyer was on an emergency call. A retaining wall failure at a commercial property 3 hours out. The kind of job that keeps the lights on and cannot be declined. Bram had an unexpected anxiety episode, the kind that required calm and proximity, and 2 hours of old nature documentaries, until he could sleep. And at the same moment, a client emergency landed in my work phone, the kind of thing that gets you noticed or gets you quietly passed over. I turned my phone face down. I sat on the floor next to Bram with a glass of water and the remote and stayed until he fell asleep. I caught up with the client the next morning and explained, without apology, what had happened. I did not adjust my priorities. My supervisor at the time did not love that. I did not change course. The next day, Bram said to me, quietly, "You didn't have to stay the whole time." "I know," I said. He nodded and went back to his notebook. That was the whole conversation. But something in him was different after that. Settled, the way a person settles when a test they've been running comes back the way they hoped. The company grew the way most real things grow, slowly, then faster, then in a way that felt like it had always been inevitable. Western state building codes shifted in 2021, and the seismic retrofit market suddenly needed exactly what Sawyer and Carver had been quietly building for years. A regional contractor noticed, then a larger firm, then a development group operating in 4 states. Bram was part of that shift, though nobody outside our garage knew it yet. He had a habit of sitting in the corner of the workshop with his notebook while Sawyer and Carver worked. He never interrupted. He watched and he wrote. One afternoon, he pushed the notebook across the workbench and pointed at a sketch. His handwriting labored but precise, and said, "This joint. The load angle is off by 3 degrees. Across enough cycles, it'll fatigue here." He tapped the spot. Sawyer looked at it for a long time. The joint was off. A small error, compounded across a sufficient number of load cycles, that would have produced a failure point in one of their key product lines. They corrected it. The following year, during the due diligence phase of the acquisition, that correction appeared in the structural engineering review as evidence of rigorous internal quality control. The acquiring firm noted it specifically in their documentation. Bram's name appeared in that section, quietly, accurately, as the person who had identified the issue. He didn't know that yet. I'll get to when he found out. The acquisition closed in early 2026. I will not pretend I understand every mechanism of how these things are structured because the machinery is not the point. Sawyer and Carver's company sold for just under $9 million. Our household's portion came to roughly $3.5 million, on paper, locked for 6 months. We could not access it, borrow substantially against it, or change our daily lives with it in any concrete way. We were still in the same house, same mortgage, same weeknight dinners. The family found out before we told anyone. Business news travels. My mother had apparently maintained quiet contact with a cousin who paid attention to such things, 11 days after the deal announcement. "I counted, because I count everything," my mother called. Her voice came through warm and unhurried, as if the previous 7 years were weather that had simply passed over. "Ivy, sweetheart," she said, "it's been too long." Not I was wrong, not I'm sorry. Just too long, as though time were the thing that had crossed my name off that envelope and not her own hand. My sister texted within the hour. She led with warmth, then nostalgia, specific childhood memories, inside jokes, the smell of my mother's kitchen at the holidays. 4 messages. She pivoted to what she called a family conversation we needed to have, about fairness and resources and what people were actually owed. I had seen this exact script once before. 3 years earlier, she had reached out the same way. The same warmth, the same specific memories, the same turn in the road, And when I declined to co-sign a loan for a business situation she called temporary, she had gone cold and silent for 3 full years. I had kept the entire text thread the way I keep everything. I pulled both threads up and set them side by side, the same opening, the same pivot point. Different amounts, identical map. Hester, when I showed her, said, "Honey, they don't miss you. They miss what they think you have access to." She told me to log every contact with its date. I already had been. Then 2 things arrived in the same week, and I could not unsee either of them. The first was a photograph. A kind cousin sent it without much commentary. It showed my father at a lake, holding a fishing rod and a beer, laughing at something off camera. His color good, his posture easy, his shoulders square. The date stamp was recent. My gravely ill father, the man I had been told was declining for 7 years, was standing in afternoon sunlight, looking like a man on a pleasant Saturday. 7 years of guilt cracked down the middle in a single image. I did not explode. I want you to understand the discipline that took, because I am not a saint. I am just a person who learned very young that the calm hand keeps the receipts. I sat with that photograph for a long time, and underneath the anger something colder and more useful rose up. The shape of the lie finally becoming visible. He had been sick, I found that out later. A cardiac event, a stent, frightening weeks, real. But he had recovered, fully. And not once in 7 years had my mother corrected the story she had been circulating. A recovered man was no use to her. A man at death's door kept me guilty, and kept everyone else angry at me on her behalf. The second thing was a letter forwarded by a relative, a non-renewal notice from my parents' property insurer. The reason was printed plainly. The detached structures on the property had been flagged in a wildfire risk assessment. Coverage was being discontinued, and the existing buildings did not meet current structural standards for the region. My parents had a property they could no longer insure. My husband's company did exactly this kind of work. I sat with that for a while. Then I filed the letter in the accordion folder and I waited. Our attorney, a woman named Aldine, who had handled the acquisition documentation and had the quality of someone who has genuinely heard everything, listened to the full family history when I told it to her one afternoon. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The problem with people like your mother is that everyone around her can feel that she lied. Feeling isn't proof. What you'd need is her wanting something in exchange for the lie, in writing." She tapped her desk once. People like this always put it in writing eventually. When they want something large enough, they make a list. She wrote 2 words on her notepad and slid it across. Wait, document. I had been doing both for 7 years, without knowing I was waiting for anything in particular. They came on a Saturday. My mother in her good coat, my sister half a step behind, both of them carrying the particular energy of people who have rehearsed and believe the rehearsal has prepared them. My mother had a folder, not a new one. It had the soft-handled corners of something opened and revised many times. Whatever was inside had existed long before the acquisition announcement. This had been ready. It had just been waiting for the number to be large enough to justify the ask. We sat in the living room. Sawyer offered water. My mother looked around our house the way she looked at every room, pricing it, comparing it, filing the data. She placed the folder on the coffee table with both hands and used her gentlest voice. "We think it's time to heal this family," she said, "but healing has to be fair to everyone who sacrificed." The list was typed, clean 12-point font, 2 full pages. There was a financial figure. $1.2 million, described as compensation for the investment made in my upbringing, education, and the opportunities they had provided. There was a request that Sawyer's company assess and remediate my parents' property at no cost as a professional courtesy, now that the expertise was, in her phrasing, in the family. There was a position requested for my sister, based on her connections, which was the first I had heard of my sister having any relevant to this industry. There was $8,000 a month for my father's ongoing medical care. And at the very bottom, in that same clean font, one final item. A written statement to be shared with extended family, that I had returned home, reconciled with my parents, and acknowledged the hardship my absence had created for them. Sawyer read it all the way through, unhurried. His eyes went back to one line near the bottom, read it again, and then a small smile settled at the corner of his mouth. Not triumphant, not cruel, the specific expression of a man who has just watched someone hand him exactly the thing he could not have requested directly. You should have run this by a lawyer before you typed it, he said quietly. My mother's face changed. Just for a moment, the way a face changes when it understands something has gone wrong, but hasn't yet found the framing for it. Her hand moved toward the folder. My sister looked between us without tracking what had shifted. Sawyer set the folder back down and looked at my mother steadily. You spent 7 years telling everyone Ivy abandoned a sick man, he said, and you just handed me a bill for his medical care. He tapped the line, $8,000 a month, for a man I have a photograph of from 3 weeks ago holding a fish at a lake. That photograph has a date on it. This document has a date on it. A lawyer just needs both. My mother began to say something about his heart, about how serious it had been, and I let her start because I wanted to be the one to finish it. He had a real event, I said. A stent, several frightening weeks, and then he recovered completely. And you never corrected the story, because a recovered man is no use to you. A sick man is a leash. You kept him sick in the telling because it kept me guilty and kept the whole family furious at me on your behalf. For 7 years. She reached for more complicated framing. I opened the accordion folder I had set on the end table when they arrived. I took out the returned letter first, still sealed. My name crossed out in her handwriting, the stamp still visible. I set it directly on top of the demand list. Then I took out my phone and read both of my sister's texts out loud, the one from 3 years ago and the one from 11 days ago, back to back, without commentary. Same opening lines, same specific memory invoked, same pivot point, different amounts, identical structure. You have a script, I said. You ran it on me once before, when her business needed a co-signer, and you're running it again. Both threads have timestamps. Our attorney has copies of both now. My sister's face went somewhere. I hadn't seen it go. Not anger, something closer to recognition she didn't want to be having. I pointed at the last item on the list, the written statement. The one where I was to announce to extended family that I had come home and acknowledged the hardship my absence had caused them. You can't have both stories, I said. You cannot tell everyone for 7 years that I abandoned this family, bill me for the abandonment, and simultaneously require me to issue a statement saying I'm the one who came home. Those are 2 different stories. You put both of them on the same 2 pages, in the same folder, in your own handwriting, at the top, and typed below it. A lawyer only needs the folder. The room went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with drama. Even my sister had nothing. My mother reached one more time for the version of events she had lived inside for 7 years. We only ever wanted what was best. Then where was the phone call, I said. Not the one 11 days after the acquisition announcement. An earlier one that said, I've heard what's being said about you, and I want to know if it's true. There wasn't one. We both knew that. I took the last item from the folder, a printed page. The acquisition's internal quality review documentation, the section where the structural correction had been noted, the paragraph where Bram's name appeared as the person who identified the issue. I set it over everything else on the coffee table. The property you want us to remediate, I said. The one your insurer dropped. You want my husband's company to fix it as a courtesy, now that the expertise is in the family. I looked at my mother directly. The company has the credibility it has, partly because Bram caught an engineering error no one else saw. The same Bram you sat across from at your dinner table and described as a permanent arrangement I couldn't give back. I tapped the page. His name is in the deal, he's in the documentation. He is one of the reasons the deal closed the way it did. My mother looked at the papers on the table. He was 22 years old, I said. He practiced what he was going to say in the car on the way to your house. He wore an ironed shirt. And you talked about him like he was a logistics problem the room needed to work around. Something in her face came up to the edge of something. I watched it happen, and then I watched her pull back from it. She was not going to cross that line. Not in front of us. She reached for the folder. The front door opened. My father walked in. He had come with them. My mother had left him in the car, I understood that immediately. Kept him outside, as the visible proof of frailty if she needed to play that card. But he had gotten out of the car on his own. He had walked to the front door on his own. He looked at the papers on the coffee table. He looked at me. His hands stayed at his sides, and I noticed, because I noticed things, that they stayed there open the whole time. He did not fold anything. She's right, he said, to my mother clearly without looking away from me. I let it happen, every part of it. That was all he said in that moment. But it was more than I had received from him in 7 years, and it landed in the room like weather breaking after a long, dry season. My sister tried once more. Fairness, family, need. My mother gathered what remained of her composure and the folder and stood. But the thing they had come to accomplish was already over, not the way they had planned it. Aldine's letter went out the following week. The response came back agreeing to every term she had laid out. No lawsuit, no courtroom, just the documented fact that they had known what was true and circulated a different story for 7 years, and that continuing to do so would cost them the standing in their community that my mother had spent her entire adult life carefully building. The standing mattered more than the argument. The response was the shortest, most honest communication I had ever received from either of them. A few weeks later, my aunt called to apologize. She said she had believed the story for 7 years and was saying so plainly. She asked how Bram was doing. It was small. It was late. I took it anyway because I am trying to be the kind of person who can tell the difference between an apology that costs something and one that is only strategic. My father asked to see me alone. We met at a diner between our neighborhoods. He did not fold his napkin. His hand stayed flat on the table the whole time, and I noticed, because I always notice. I let her make you the villain because standing up was harder, he said. That's mine, not hers. Mine. I had a health scare and I let her build a story around it, and I watched that story run for 7 years and I said nothing. He did not ask for the years back. He did not mention his health or his age, or how much time he might have left. He did not ask for money. He named what he had done, one item at a time, the way you read a list you have been avoiding for a long time and are finally ready to own. I can forgive you, I told him. That part is free. Trust is the expensive part. You'll pay it slowly, and I set the price. He nodded like a man who had expected exactly that answer and considered it fair. We started with coffee, once a month, a narrow door, open just wide enough for one person at a time. When I told Bram that his name was in the acquisition documentation, that the thing he had written in his notebook and pushed across a workbench had been formally credited in the deal. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I just wrote it down. I write everything down. I know you do, I said. It actually mattered. It mattered. He went back to his notebook, but something in how he carried himself was different after that. Easier. The way a person is different when a thing they have quietly suspected about themselves turns out to be true in the right direction. That night we made dinner, the three of us in a kitchen too small for it. Sawyer burned the onions. Bram narrated it like a sporting event, deadpan and precise. Hester came by for the leftovers, she claimed not to really want, and then ate 2 full plates. Nobody kept a ledger, nobody owed anybody anything. I have the accordion folder still. It sits on a lower shelf now, easier to reach, which I take as a sign that it has stopped being something I'm bracing against and started being something I can simply set down. People ask whether the money changed things. It didn't fix anything it wasn't the solution to. What fixed things was smaller and harder to explain in a single sentence. It was a man who laid out his entire situation before I had agreed to anything, so I could decide with my eyes open. It was a woman who lent us her grandmother's tablecloth without keeping track of the favor. It was a 22-year-old in an ironed shirt who practiced in the car on the way to meet people who were never going to deserve the effort, and who wrote things down in his notebooks and turned out to matter in ways that everyone who had written him off could not have imagined and did not get to take credit for. Family is not the people who raised you and kept a running tab. It is not blood, and it is not net worth, and it is not who stood in the center of every photograph while you stood at the edge, already knowing where you belonged. Family is who is still in the room when you have nothing to offer them, and who, when you suddenly have something, wants none of it for themselves. If any part of this reached you, if you are the person right now being told that someone you love is a liability you cannot afford, a burden that will drag you under, a permanent arrangement you cannot give back, I want you to hear the one thing it took me 7 years to finally learn. You are allowed to close the door. You are allowed to keep it closed to some people and crack it open slowly for others, on your own terms and your own timeline. Forgiveness and access are not the same thing, and you get to hold the key to both. Share this with someone who needs to hear that today. Subscribe if you want to stay. There is always a next one, and there is always someone somewhere finally setting down a weight they were never supposed to be carrying in the first place.